Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spin It Reviews, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 15 albums of 2014. Now, before I actually continue with the list, I gotta let you guys know one simple ground rule right here. No spoilers from me about any of the albums I talk about in this countdown, especially for the top part of it. Now, I know this script I wrote is kind of long, about 4 or 5 pages. It's safe to say it's going to run about 15 minutes, give or take. But just bear with me and just try to be patient. I know you might be like, oh, the number 13 album, who cares about that? No one except for this loser, apparently. But you guys have just got to be patient. Bear with me. Because I'm just kind of sick of this whole gimme, gimme, now culture that America and the entire world seems to be on about lately with the internet and technology and just over the last few decades, how you can't just live in this moment instead of just wanting what'll just come to you 10 minutes from now anyway. And hey, camera guy, eyes down here. I don't pay you for no reason. Actually, I don't pay you anything at all because you don't exist. Can you tell I spent New Year's alone in this room with a giant pizza? Okay guys, but in all seriousness, there are a couple big disclaimers I gotta lay down here before I actually start the list. First off, and I can't believe this doesn't have to go without saying, this is by no means a list of the objectively best albums of 2014. This is merely a list of my personal favorites, with the barometer of me and under the conditions of my personal opinions, and nothing else. 2, and again, it should go without saying, but I haven't heard every album that came out this year, including some that have been topping everyone else's year-end lists. I've heard 66 new albums this year, and I'm just going by those for obvious reasons. On top of that, there might be some albums that haven't been appearing on all the big blogs' lists for one reason or another, so definitely expect a couple wildcards here and there. And 3, rather than talking about a few honorable mentions here, I actually made a Topsters collage of my top 50 albums of the year, which I posted on the Spin It Reviews Facebook page, and you can check out via the link in the description, along with reviews for a good majority of the albums I'm going to talk about here. So with all that out of the way, let's get things started with number 15. In the first of a few albums I unfortunately didn't get the chance to talk about in a video until now, Tom Petty continues to be one of the most consistently great classic rock artists still making music today. Sort of in the same way that Paul McCartney's New did last year, Hypnotic Eye shows Tom and the guys still cranking out incredibly catchy, well-written rock songs, spanning more subgenres and styles than you might expect on a typical Heartbreakers album, and along the way, in addition to the musicianship and vocals somehow not aging a day, Tom actually ends up writing some of the most biting lyrics of his entire career, even taking a much more political turn at times and mostly pulling it off really well. As surprising as this might be to hear, this is actually Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' first ever #1 album, but with Hypnotic Eye, they've certainly earned it. It took balls for Jack Antonoff, right off his huge success as the guitarist of Fun, to follow it up by completely starting from scratch with a new solo project, but he really managed to pull it off. Jack's got a good amount of charm and range as a vocalist, and his guitar work, when utilized, can really add a lot to these songs. The overall sound of this album does a great job of recalling some of the best pop songcraft of the 80s, but with modern touches like loops, samples, and a much more confessional lyrical style to really make it fresh and interesting. A lot of these songs just have such an anthemic quality to them, which I personally find refreshing in an era of rock music where, at least in the underground, it seems like people just turn their noses up at the idea of sheer, unabashed bombast like this. It might not top Aim and Ignite for me, but Strange Desire is great all the same. Now, I'm still of the unpopular opinion that all of Linkin Park's albums are at least good. That being said, at this point in their careers, this is the album they needed to make. The Hunting Party walks the line perfectly of partially returning to the sound that made them big to begin with, but not in a way that feels like they're just pandering to the fan base by rehashing. In fact, if anything, this is the closest to straight up metal, hard rock, and even punk on a couple occasions that Linkin Park has ever gotten. Not to mention that lyrically, this is easily their most mature and self-aware album to date, which frankly, if we're being honest, was my main problem with their first couple albums. This is yet another step in Linkin Park's increasingly and wonderfully scatterbrained career path, and I for one can't wait to see what they do next. Every year, it seems like there's a band that I've heard praise sung about constantly for as long as I've followed the indie music scene, but I've just never gotten around to until their new album, which I'm subsequently blown away by. In 2012, it was Block Party, last year it was Waves, and this year it's Death from Above 1979. With just drums and a heavily distorted bass, on their first album in a decade, these guys don't sound like they've aged a day, creating one of the most full, punchy, and frankly fun garage rock albums I've heard all year. There were definitely a few great comebacks this year, and this ranks among them. Look, there's a reason why this album's on everyone else's top 10s, namely that it's awesome, and definitely my favorite rap album of the year. Great beats from LP that complement him and Killer Mike perfectly, and toe the line between hooky and experimental, dense, witty, and endlessly quotable wordplay with just enough lowbrow humor to balance it out, and some really potent sociopolitical commentary. This is basically the definition of a well-rounded hip-hop album, and I can't wait to delve into these guys' solo work. Okay, top 10 time. Now, I was initially going to cover this album in the last Underground Corner episode from a few days ago, but since I knew from the first listen that this was going to be on this list, I figured I'd wait to talk about it until now. In a nutshell, if there's an indie rock album from 2014 with more explosive and downright primal energy and ambition than this, then I haven't heard it. I initially ran into this band as an opening act back in April and was absolutely blown away. There's just so much tension and progression packed into all these songs, with enough dramatic edge along the way to just grab the listener by the face on the first song and not let go until the end of the last, even on the quieter moments. In fact, the only reason this album isn't higher on the list is one, because I just heard it earlier this week, and frankly, I want to see how it fares over time, and two, because I can't find the lyrics for this thing listed anywhere, and I get a feeling that's kind of a big part of the album and the concept anyway. Still, it's an utterly fantastic record, and I can only hope these guys get more buzz over time. I'll admit right off the bat that my metal listening this year has been a bit neglectful, but that doesn't mean I didn't find an album that really made my year for this genre. Unpopular opinion, I know, but I'm loving Mastodon more and more with every album, and this only combines the best of what they've done so far for me. The heaviness of their first three, the experimentation and atmosphere of Crack the Sky, the Hunters' focus on accessible songcraft and catchy melodies, it's all mixed together to make the Metal Titans' most engaging album to date. On another album I'm really kicking myself for not doing a full review of when it came out, Band of Skulls continues to prove themselves as a true force in the world of revivalist hard rock, naturally mixing it with more modern, slower elements, and even a few subgenres fused in for good effect. But something that actually helps Himalayan stand out from a lot of Band of Skulls' stylistic peers is that the lyrics are actually really interesting. In a nutshell, it takes the point of view of two people in a bad relationship and focuses on morality and the dynamic of people who think almost entirely differently trying to make it work. There are a few albums in this top 10 that really surprised me with how smart and creative they were lyrically, and this is definitely an example of that. Plus, there's big riffs that kick all kind of butt, so there you go. Oh, and you know how I was saying in the Black Friday video that Mastodon artwork is what picture discs were made for? Well, Band of Skulls artwork is what gatefolds were made for. Yeah. That all being said though, in terms of great straightforward hard rock albums, Bayside probably takes it for me for this year. Cole just has this ferocity and snarl to it throughout, as Anthony Ranieri just unloads emotionally on manipulative exes, and even spends a couple tracks questioning his own place as a somewhat prominent songwriter within the scene he's in. Also, there's something about the guitar work on this album that just grabs me in particular. I don't know what it is, maybe the more major to minor chord progressions that add a certain extra weight, or the impressive musicianship and solos for the style they're in, or the just fantastic booming production of the whole thing, but it just works incredibly well for me. Overall, this is a cult that I certainly wouldn't mind joining. Hey, my list, my puns. And why are you retaliating? We just established before you don't exist. This is kind of breaking the continuity here. I'm always a sucker for an album with diversity, and The Burning of Rome did just that with their sophomore album. I actually kind of regret not listening to Year of the Ox more when I interviewed their frontman earlier this year, since it's definitely a lot more special than I gave it credit for at the time. Garage rock, psychedelic rock, indie folk, new wave, even some stuff that could have come off an old Danny Elfman soundtrack, and everything in between, and it's pulled off remarkably well somehow. It's rare when you come across a band this wonderfully diverse, and that definitely makes The Burning of Rome a band to watch. This is another one that's been on everyone's list, and for great reason. It's just this one-of-a-kind feel this album has, being equal parts tight, infectious, experimental, bizarre, eccentric, tongue-in-cheek, absurd, emotional, introspective, and a lot more. Not to mention Andy Clark's rather abrasive guitar work that really should clash with the rest of this, but by some musical magic doesn't. Basically, if you want someone to pick up where 90s Beck and Talking Heads left off, but in a truly unique way, I can't recommend this thing enough. Also, fun fact, last semester in English class, I was doing a research essay on the pros and cons of social media, and I was allowed to cite a song, so I used some lyrics from Digital Witness and got a great grade. So, that tells you all of it right there. And speaking of Beck, let's not forget that in 2014, he dropped one of the best albums of his whole career, even surpassing, in my opinion, its spiritual predecessor, Sea Change. Beautifully serene indie folk with songwriting not only good enough to not make it run together, but good enough to make every single song a highlight, even if there are little to no diversions over the course of this thing. Plus, of course, there's the lyrics, which just twist around the sadness of Sea Change to be a little more positive, actually, being about accepting where you're at in life in the face of losing someone you love, whether it being through a breakup or a death, whatever you might interpret it as, and it's this very interesting emotional journey when you're reading along in the liner notes with the lyrics. And while I'm still generally a sucker for Beck's weirder, poppier side, I still can't deny what a fantastic comeback album Morning Phase is. In a year where I admittedly rested a little more on artists I already liked than I care to admit, there are still a few debut albums that really managed to impress me. And my third favorite from this year is the debut full-length from an electropop act from New Zealand with production by Joel Little and genuinely relatable lyrics for teenagers and young adults. Kinda like my third favorite from last year. Coincidence? You decide. But also in a year full of great, emotionally complex breakup albums, Evergreen just might be my favorite out of all of them, if only for how incredibly developed the narrating main character is in all this. The mother and father really sets the scene contextually of her learning to be independent as she's leaving home, and subsequently getting a lot more needy in her own romantic relationships for all the right and wrong reasons. Again, like with Morning Phase, this is just an incredible emotional ride of an album, and some great catchy layered electropop on top of that. And personally, the fact that this album is being so ignored by both the American pop charts and most music publications is really a shame, since I can really see these guys crossing over into the mainstream the same way Lorde has. Basically, take what I said about The Hunting Party being the album the band needed to make, despite generally good albums before that, and multiply it about 5 times over. Like I said in the review, Weezer's been one of my favorite bands for a while, and with Everything Will Be Alright in the end, they've made one of the most defining statements of their career. The songs are tight and fun and infectious as ever, but also just as personal and transparently introspective as their first couple albums. I always love when a band's not afraid of going full-on meta with their lyrics, and Rivers delivers a ton of that here, really examining his career as a whole, and is somehow finding a way of admitting directly to making musical mistakes in the past, but without coming off as pandering and actually seeming really sincere about it. Sorry guys, I've screwed up and forgot to record an entire part of the Weezer part of this video, so I'm just going to do that now. But again, at the end of the day, like a lot of Weezer albums, this is just one hard-edged power pop anthem after another, even with some added experimentation thrown in here and there, like on the Futurescope trilogy. Everything Will Be Alright in the end is not only a return to form, but easily their best since those 90s albums. And in my mind, in terms of sheer quality, I'd even put it on a similar level.
And now for number 1, and just so you guys know, my battery kept running out because I was filming for so long, so my delivery is going to be a bit rushed from this point on.
As opposed to last year when 21 Pilots Vessel basically became one of my favorite albums of all time, Language of Perspective is an album that sorta quietly became my favorite of the year. It's not like the most technically mind-blowing album in the world, it's not packed with inventive experimentation or an ultra-distinct sound that absolutely no one in the world resembles whatsoever, but between the effortlessly memorable melodies, the naturally emotive vocals I found especially powerful, the tight rhythm sections, the nice jangly guitar leads, it all just works together in a way that works incredibly well for me, and I just find it irresistible. But probably the thing that connected with me most about this album was the lyrics, which, without revealing too much personally, really is a case of relatability being a major factor. It basically talks about transitioning into adulthood and learning to forge your own path in life, and how the decisions you make in that regard can affect both your own mental well-being and your relationship with others. Sure, on paper this might seem a little after-school specially, but the way Bad Sons approaches this, it just feels so genuine in the situations it paints and how they choose to frame all of it. Again, this is the type of album where on paper, or at least on the surface level musically, it's not that big a deal, but if you're in a certain headspace and go in not expecting the type of huge game changer that usually top these year-end lists, then it just might leave an impact with you, and personally, I just couldn't get enough of it. Okay guys, the 2014 reviewing season was fun, but it looks like it's coming to a close. I'm not going to really be able to make a 2015 anticipated albums list, but I might throw in a couple classic reviews here and there, we'll see. And personally, I can't wait for what comes ahead, so share this around with anyone who might be interested, like the Facebook page in the description for updates, commentaries, music news, and reviews of older albums, and hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spin It Reviews. One more thing, take a look at the initials of this album, like the acronym they make. EW-BAIT. Now, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I'm starting to think that Weezer's even more self-aware